Overview. In Love is the Cure, 2012. Pop superstar, Elton John, recounts his life in parallel with his AIDS activism. Starting from the beginning of the epidemic in 1981, he tells about people who have fought against AIDS, those he has lost to the disease, and his foundation's effort to bring an end to it. The keys are education, research, fundraising, and above all, compassion. More work to do. Decades after the AIDS epidemic began, humanity still struggles with its effects on a huge number of people. While millions have received treatments, Rwanda remains the only sub-Saharan African country on track to achieve all the health developmental goals agreed upon by the world's countries. And it is the only country other than Botswana to reach universal access to AIDS therapy. The issues relating to AIDS and HIV are complex and layered. The key to future progress is Elton John's formula of empathy, compassion, and hard work towards structural changes. The tragedy of Ryan White. Statistics take away from how huge the scope of HIV/AIDS is, despite the fact that 25 million people have died from it in 30 years. Personal accounts can help make the statistics real, especially ones like the story of Ryan White, a boy who contracted HIV at age 13 through blood transfusions for his hemophilia. Ryan, his family, and their supporters had to deal with the stigma of the disease in the 1980s after a local newspaper found out about his case. He couldn't return to normalcy despite it being his deepest wish in the world, knowing that he wouldn't transmit AIDS. When Elton John heard about Ryan, he felt the need to aid him and his family. He reached out to the Whites, and they ended up helping him way more than he did them, improving his behavior and inspiring him to beat his cocaine addiction. Ryan and his family testified for President Ronald Reagan's Commission on AIDS, advocating for education and research on AIDS and its treatment. 4 months after Ryan died, the Ryan White Comprehensive AIDS Resource Emergency Care Act was passed, doubling spending on AIDS during the 80s. In the 1980s, AIDS was a death sentence that came with a lot of stigma and threats from people who feared the disease. The first reporting of the AIDS epidemic was in 1981 by the Centers for Disease Control, and it was linked to gay men. As a result, AIDS was not considered a serious issue. This only changed with the identification of the virus and FDA approval of blood tests to screen for it. By 1983, scientists knew AIDS was contracted only through exchange of blood or sexual fluids, but the world had been overwhelmed with fake news about the disease, leading to violence and the passage of many cruel laws targeting people with HIV. After years of silence, Reagan spoke out about AIDS in 1987, and scientists found a treatment, AZT, that would slow its spread in people's bodies. John regrets not doing more for AIDS patients in the 1980s due to his ego and cocaine addiction. Unlike other celebrities such as Elizabeth Glaser, Larry Kramer, Elizabeth Taylor, and Princess Diana, John did not do much until Ryan's death woke him up. A journey of recovery. John reached rock bottom after Ryan's funeral, coming face to face with his addiction. He was using cocaine, drinking too much, eating too much, and then puking it up as a way to control his life that was quickly unraveling. He was trapped in his success and wealth, until his boyfriend at the time, Hugh Williams, left for rehab. John tried but failed to stop him from going. After a while, he reached out to Williams, who managed to convince John to seek help for his addictions and eating disorders. After 6 weeks in rehab in 1990, John returned to London completely changed but still recovering. John relocated to Atlanta where he volunteered for AIDS patients. But this wasn't enough, and John eventually started the Elton John AIDS Foundation, EJF. John realized that most AIDS foundations were dedicated to curing the disease, rather than providing protection from the virus or improving the lives of patients. The time John spent in rehab informed the way he ran the foundation, and he focused on the dignity of those affected by AIDS. A solid foundation. EJF has focused on basic needs, attempting to decrease both the spread of HIV and the prejudice against people who contract it. Raising funds was surprisingly easy, and money could be spent strategically through the National Community AIDS Partnerships distribution model. EJF established a sister organization in London with the same mission, and Robert Key, John's friend, at its head. Key, who died in 2009, saw that AIDS was global and didn't just center on the West, but had even reached Africa. EDGIF was also led by David Furnish, John's long-term partner, who is chairman of the boards of both organizations. Even Princess Diana had wanted to be part of EDGIF before her tragic death. John is proud of all that he could give back. The faces of AIDS. AIDS affects marginalized people to a higher degree than others. The disease shows which people the world cares least about, and these failures to care continue the spread of the virus today. Washington, D.C. has one of the worst AIDS crises in the world, with 3% of its population being HIV positive. While African Americans make up 14% of the U.S. population, they constitute 44% of positive cases, with a rate of infection 7 times higher than that of white Americans. 60% of HIV-positive people fall into the category of men who sleep with men, and 16.9% have been incarcerated. Many others are children, like Ariel Glazer, who contracted the virus from blood transfusions her mother Elizabeth received during delivery. While AZT had been approved, it was not yet available for children. Ariel died at age 7. Elizabeth then had one mission: lobbying for pediatric AIDS research. As the wife of actor Paul Michael Glazer, she was heard. She eventually convinced Congress to devote millions of dollars to it. Elizabeth died of AIDS, but progress was made. Her second child, Jake, was born with AIDS but is doing well. While things have changed in the West, 3.4 million children are still infected globally. The only way to truly eradicate AIDS is to treat all those affected by it equally and compassionately, whatever their backgrounds. A worldwide effort. South Africa is one of the countries most affected by AIDS. In South Africa, AIDS is primarily passed through heterosexual sex and amplified by the country's rape crisis. In addition, rape survivors are shamed, preventing them from coming out about their experience and seeking medical assistance. There are a lot of services available to fight shaming and spread HIV awareness, but there is still much to be done. Fumana, a South African girl, is an example of what can be done. She contracted AIDS at age 8 when her cousin raped her. Though she first concealed her shame, she eventually got treatment, and she grew up to become an AIDS activist. In order to fight AIDS, we must stop criminalizing and shunning those who have it. It's crucial to practice empathy in fighting AIDS. John implements it in every step of EDGIF's work, from normalizing the disease to enhancing HIV programs and adopting legal strategies. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine has been hit particularly hard by AIDS. Those affected are young and often homeless or drug addicted, and they are ostracized by people who consider AIDS a sinful disease. The government's plan to deal with this crisis was weak and disjointed, with nothing truly changing. EDGIF then began working with local Ukrainian organizations to talk more openly and compassionately about HIV/AIDS, while providing the services that patients need, dropping the price of medicine. A similar shift is needed in Haiti, where an earthquake in 2010 worsened the AIDS/HIV crisis even further, especially in the LGBT community. But through the persistence of local organizations and the support of EDGIF, change is on the horizon. In the U.S., the epidemic in Black communities of the South is worsened by disenfranchisement and racism. Even with a lack of resources, personal advocacy for treating patients as individuals rather than statistics can make all the difference. Showing the power of empathy in turning things around. The power of governments. Although he's sung for audiences all around the world, John notes that the scariest performance he's ever had to put on was for the U.S. Senate. He was introduced to many senators at a breakfast, and saw that both political parties supported the Ryan White Act and respected John's ideas about seeking a world without AIDS. President George W. Bush said that the AIDS crisis was solvable, and that billions would be dedicated to the fight. This became the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief, PEPFAR, which taught John the power that governments can have as opposed to singular institutions. When governments stand in the way of organizing against AIDS, nothing of substance can be done, and the choice to help solve the issue or exacerbate it is in their hands. Issues in the fight. After the success of PEPFAR, the New York Times reported that an American company, Bayer, had sold millions of dollars worth of hemophilia medicine to Asia and Latin America that could transmit AIDS. Bayer only paid $50 million in compensation for this crime, which hurt many more people than that amount could cover. The issue with pharmaceutical companies is that they choose not to sell AIDS medication for accessible prices. They'd rather make money than help end the disease. The Clinton Foundation began to investigate cases of companies taking advantage of foreign governments. Educated in this. Another force that has hindered progress against AIDS is the Catholic Church, especially with its generally negative opinion on condoms. Nonprofits, meanwhile, are a force for good in the fight. They fill the gaps in the needs of those who face AIDS, because nothing can be done in isolation. The end of the epidemic. The only true solution to the epidemic is love. Every person with AIDS can be given a normal life with treatment, if only compassion becomes global. The world must make safe sex accessible and promote safety in drug users, as well as ensure that patients who begin medication keep using it for the rest of their lives. Elton and David were inspired to change their lives when they fell in love with an orphan in a facility where many of the kids were HIV positive. Their efforts to adopt him were unsuccessful, but they decided to start their own family and keep the love going forward.